I think it's a projection of insecurity, of realizing that, like, oh, this person's done the work to kind of question the world around them and like what they're doing, where I haven't questioned it. And I think some people might not even be aware that they're doing it that way. I think that's a huge difference between in the workplace of autistic people and non-autistic people, is that we often, pattern recognition and needing to understand things from a nuanced perspective in order to better implement what's being asked of us, is that we're trying to be helpful, but we're also trying to like understand it from our own end. And questioning a lot of that has gotten me in some pretty big trouble in the past.
Greetings, working to workers or workers. If you have a preference for what someone watching this video should be, or this channel, or listening to this podcast feed should be timed, then let me know. I wanted to share with you a section of the interview I did with Dani Noreen, the Punk Rock Autistic, that didn't make the cut of the actual full-length episode. I think this idea has been in my mind for a while about how accommodations potentially only extend to what is not necessarily challenging for others. So in my experience, a lot of the time, to be able to do something to the level that I want to, I need to ask why, and not literally sometimes just phrased as why, but to gather more context to be able to understand what we're trying to do so that I can deliver to the best of my ability. So in work, there's tons of situations where this comes up, where asking why is kind of felt like a kind of affront. It's kind of interpreted as a challenge and an affront to someone. And really it's to try to understand better, so you can either do the work better, or sometimes asking why is to understand the person better, because understanding the person better makes one feel closer to them and more aligned. And I feel this is a triggering word for a lot of people, or just being kind of asked to explain further can be a challenge for those that haven't given the thought to what they're doing or asking of someone, or what they're explaining. So in lieu of there not being an episode coming up yet, I'm taking not really a little break, just gathering thoughts, thinking about what would be good to talk about next and coordinating that. I thought I'd share this clip from that episode because I think it's important. And I think it's one of those aspects of life as someone that is a bit more analytical and is curious, where those characteristics that I feel come from a kind place and a place of wanting to understand better and to be able to deliver what someone wants, or to be able to collaborate in an effective way, or to be able to input one's ideas and alternative perspectives, can be received poorly for all sorts of reasons that are not about the individual asking the question, but can be then deflected back as a fault of the person asking the question. And I feel that can be detrimental to one's self-confidence, self-esteem, position in a job, relationship, how they're perceived by others, and how they potentially perceive themselves if they are, and I guess I'm speaking for myself, not able to access the resilience or have the tools to be able to recognize, well, I know why I said that thing, and I feel it was a fair and justifiable question, and I can't respond. I can't control how others respond to me asking what I need or what I'm interested in. And I also think, I just want to add one other thing. For me, asking why and trying to understand better is a demonstration of care. it's a demonstration of I'm interested, I want to help, or I want to support, or I want to do this well, or I want to be closer to you and understand you better. And to do that, I need to understand some of the things that the other person is offering that I don't clearly understand or fully understand yet. So it's always disappointing, I think, when that is received as negatively, because there's positive intent behind it. So here is a clip from my conversation with Dani about what I'm considering one of the most triggering words in the English language, that a lot of the time you need to couch with some additional verbiage to make it somehow justifiable, but really that just makes it, I feel like, even less direct and more convoluted somehow. Sometimes like the clearest way to say something is through less words, but sometimes less words are interpreted as being rude. So here's my conversation, or the section of the conversation with Dani. New episode coming soon. And thanks for watching or listening. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. And if you have any thoughts on this conversation, or asking why, or asking for additional context, or why someone's doing something, or how they think about something, and you had experiences with responses, be it good or bad, or doesn't need the label of good or bad, please put them in the comments or share them with me. I'd be interested to hear. All right, before it gets too loud out on the London street, I will cut this and wish you a good day.
I said this to someone. I was on the radio the other day, and I said this to the DJ that was interviewing me. Lots of like what are seen as of kind of autistic traits, like kind of being quite direct, like being very honest. I mean, these are held up just as virtues, but they're not necessarily lived by the majority. But when they're actually exhibited by neurodivergent autistic people, they're kind of criticized as kind of being, well, no, I thought that was what we meant to do: be honest, kind of like this is exactly what I'm saying, like be clear, be trustworthy. In a way, like that kind of characteristic of neurodivergent people, playing by the rules. Well, you're playing by the rules. You're doing what you're told are the virtuous things when you're growing up. You're doing that, and you're kind of getting told that's wrong. You're too blunt. You're too honest. You're too trustworthy. You're naive.
It's funny. It's kind of talking about like how I mentioned earlier that like autistic people are usually as the ones with social deficit, but it's like we're speaking directly without subtext. We're saying what we mean, and we just only expect that to be given in return. And it's the lack of directness, I think, is what's confusing for us. But it's also like these virtues that society, especially like Western ideology that comes from a lot of these like Judeo-Christian ideas of and Puritanism, puritanical ideas, right? But like that inherently have like good value to them, but they're just not followed by the people who often who follow that idea, where the people who are outside of that naturally have a lot of those like ideas of compassion and justice and and consideration and open communication, honesty, are then, like you said, criticized. It's kind of like, well, what do you want from us? Like, we're doing what's expected. You're failing to live up to that. And then I think that's where that dynamic becomes really, that was a factor that made it really difficult to navigate employment, right? It was a huge factor. It was that specifically, is that societal expectation, double standard that like, I used to always say it's kind of like being autistic and navigating society is kind of like everybody else around you has their own secret code or language, and they're all in on it, and you're the only one who wasn't given that. And it's navigating that. It's like everybody's in on a joke and you don't understand the punchline.
I think this can be especially problematic in job interviews, for instance, where kind of, one answers pretty honestly to a question, and maybe perhaps others are able to kind of pull out the bits that maybe don't sound as would not be as attractive to an employer.
Yeah, they like being able to tell people what they want to hear rather than like what they're at, like the response to what they're asking directly. That's I used to work retail, and that was like the hardest thing, not only in interviews but just navigating that space of like the idea of like customer service, where someone would come in and like, oh hey, like I want to buy this, and I would tell them straight up, don't buy that. It's that's not worth your money. And then the employer would be like, well, you need to sell it. It's like, but they could sell this and be much more satisfied with this. I thought you said it's customer service. They'd be happy with this. Like, but we need to make money on it. It's like, well, if they're satisfied with it, they're going to come back and spend more money. And it's like that logical, rational, like, linear thinking to me makes sense. But then there's all this like weird circumnavigating around trying to find the same answer. It's like, I could cut out all of the fluff and get from point A to point B much faster and much more satisfying for other people, but you don't want that?
Yeah, and I think a challenge is you expressing that to the manager. I wasn't in that situation, but from my own experiences, when you try to not justify but rationalize your like thinking process of why actually you're doing this because you thought it would be a helpful thing to do, can either be blocked by a kind of hierarchical, well, don't talk back, or like you're not in the position to be talking about how our sales strategy should be, or just kind of seen as like obtuse, really, as like being difficult. It's really, no, actually, I've thought about this, and one, I think we can marry both being honest and helping the customer and making a sale as well.
It's like when you ask why, it's seen as defiance. When I want to understand the thinking behind something, and then the response is usually, well, if you're asking why, you're underlying that hierarchy. Back in my head, well, the hierarchy's BS anyway. I don't, it's a social construct that doesn't make sense to me, but I'll adhere to your rule. But like, I need to understand this in order for me to do it, and trying to gain that understanding to be more applicable in that system is seen as counterproductive. And then you're at a loss because you're like, well, how do I navigate this if I don't understand it? And like wanting to understand it is seen as like fighting against it.
Yeah, I've experienced exactly this in work in the past. And my sense is a lot of the time, there's a fear there from the person that you're asking why to, that they actually haven't done the thinking to be able to answer your question. Because generally, if you know the answer to something, you're happy to say it.
I think you're absolutely, I think it's a projection of insecurity, of realizing that like, oh, this person's done the work to kind of question the world around them and like what they're doing, where I haven't questioned it. And I think some people might not even be aware that they're doing it that way. I think that's a huge difference between in the workplace of autistic people and non-autistic people, is that we often
I said this to
pattern
someone,
recognition and needing to understand things from a nuanced perspective in order to better implement what's being asked of us, is that we're trying to be helpful, but we're also trying to like understand it from our own end. And questioning a lot of that has gotten me in some pretty big trouble in the past. It's led to me losing jobs. Whereas the people I think are like on the receiving end of that are often surprised that you're questioning it. It's like, that's just the way we do it. We don't question it. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, you should. It'd make more sense if you did.
what thoughts do you have in terms of like how we as a society might change the perception of that kind of feedback that we're giving in terms of asking why, or kind of wanting to offer an alternative way where it's seen as this is a value add. This is something that, you're skilled at, in the sense of your brain works in a way where you can think outside potentially the inverted commas box and offer an alternative solution that could be beneficial for the benefit of what you're doing and what the organization is doing. How do we change the perception of that as like, you should value this because it's beneficial?
My idealized answer to that would be just hire autistic people to do decision planning. My realistic answer would be hire autistic people and hire people to do accommodation trainings and understanding like in the workplace how to better navigate the diversity of the human brain. I've found from my own experiences of being hired to do that in the workplace, coming in and doing accommodation trainings and workshops, one of the things that I really, really try to focus on is telling employers, like, you need to understand that the nuance of how things are operated doesn't fit for everybody. and that there are going to be people who are going to question you. There are going to be people who have a different way of doing things, and it might not always be out of defiance or insubordination. It might be out of asking for accommodations and a better understanding of things. And I think we have a lot of work to do. And I think in order to promote and create a systemic change on that end, the powers that be and the people who've created this paradigm that work for them need to open that door to get other people in who not specifically the people who have an education on this, but the people who live those firsthand experiences. Hire people of a diverse population to educate your environment on how those differences exist, and then respect them and understand that the way that we've been doing things doesn't work for everybody. I've seen success in that. I think I try not to be too pessimistic about it because I have my own internalized issues with that of my experiences that I've had. But taking those experiences and using that as a catalyst for change in education, I think has a lot of power behind it.
When I think sometimes we think about needs and asking for accommodations, I think maybe employers or organizations might think of it as okay, we need to change something in the physical landscape or in terms of offering this person something different from the other people. When I think about what makes something accessible in what the context we've just been talking about, really to make the workplace more accessible and gratifying for an autistic person maybe that's asking why and in order to kind of realize their work best, or anyone that is challenging something, is really the individual who's taking offense to be able to understand their own fragility at being questioned, the kind of access need, the kind of accommodation. Is that person being willing to challenge themselves that why do I feel threatened when someone asks me a question? And why, in a way, I think a challenge that maybe I've experienced, I don't know if you or your clients, people that you work with have, but really the question a lot of the time is just why. That is the end. It's just a 3-letter word with a question mark. But we try and we put all these other words around it to try to soften it up somehow for the people. But the why is, or maybe you'd add a bit more, and being willing to finding some way to for people not to kind of interpret why as you said, kind of not an attack maybe, but an affront to that person's either the work that they do or their position, but rather it's just that is the language, that is the question.
You're absolutely right, and it's one of the things that I think when people are questioned why, and they take it as a personal attack, it's definitely a misinterpretation of what the reason why is being asked for. But it also kind of goes back to what you're saying, that it makes I think people are often surprised by why, because they haven't asked why themselves. One of the things that I think is really important when going into the element of in the environment of trying to create change and accessibility is that if someone is hiring me or anybody else to offer education, and I think this goes for any marginalized and disenfranchised group, is that if you're getting those people from these communities to come into yours, and it's often those in hegemonic power, is that you really just need to be quiet and listen. That you need to understand that your preconceived notions and biases are going to be challenged. Your worldview is going to be challenged. And it might even make you challenge your own identity, your own place of privilege, your own place of power. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people are avoidant of having that, because it may make them realize that they've made mistakes, or that there have been the people who have created systems of exploitation and abuse. It goes from employers that I work with, it goes from educators that I work with, it goes from parents that I work with. I always try to come to them that this is a place of learning. There is no judgment in any sort of sense. It's a clean slate, but it's also a place of challenge. It's a place where your ideas and preconceived notions might face challenge. And in order for us to move forward, you need to accept that that door needs to be open, and you can ask anything you want, and there will never be any judgment towards that. But first and foremost, it's a place of education, and it's a place of respect, that you are bringing in people from, unfortunately, a forced lower tier of society into one of those who have the power. And if you want that to shift, a lot of this has got to come from self-reflection. And the only way for like these elements of accommodations to exist is that people need to realize that they're the ones who need to give the accommodation. I think there's a lot of work accommodations where it's very superficial. It's very like, oh, we're going to put a pride flag up, and we have a sensory room. It's like, that's not enough. It's more than just physically changing the environment. It's changing your heart and your mind to see things that your experience is the like personal subjective experience does not reflect the same of everybody else. So I think openness and compassion is really important.
Maybe you expressing that so passionately in the way that you just did is effective. But do you find that, like, how do you shift that beyond telling the person that this is effectively what I think you and the organization, the people in the positions of power would need to do, would be well placed to do? It's difficult, I guess, for a person can hear that maybe, but not necessarily know like how to realize that, I guess, if that's not something that they've needed to do. I wonder if neurodivergent people have a greater sense of like social justice potentially than the majority, because you have experience of kind of feeling treated wrongly, poorly, being discriminated against, and that probably speaks for lots of marginalized groups. If you're in the majority, if you're kind of in a relatively privileged position in society where you haven't faced those type of challenges, I wonder, like, beyond, and there's lots of kind of companies that get this leveled against them, that of a kind of not greenwashing, or all sorts of kind of performative acts of kind of social justice. Like, how is it possible to kind of like fundamentally get through, maybe you say that is about kind of who is in these leadership positions, and kind of creating a bit more diversity of experience within leadership, so it can be individuals with understanding of these issues who can remind our fellow leaders and kind of reinforce that when you're not always there to be a kind of consultant forever for that organization, for instance.
It's hard. And it's something that I don't know if I, at this point in my life, have an answer for, because there's an element of I've had a lot of those experiences, and I think every single one of us have, where we've tried to advocate and people just are unwilling to listen. For me, I do the best that I can, and I give the information and the education that I possess, and I send the resources that they could then continue from wherever that education left off to continue that path of growth. I think that there's two modes of thinking. I think there's people who will often see an opportunity of education to hire somebody as kind of like advocacy points, as like, like queer baiting or greenwashing, like you said, is like, oh, we did the thing. Look how look how inclusive we are. But then it completely stops there. It's like they just painted the walls and said that they remodeled the home. And it's like, no, you didn't actually do the work. You just made it seem like you created the illusion of it. And then there's others who will, create a DEI like for their organization, and they'll hire people of other disenfranchised groups to monitor and continue to address that. And those are at times successful, others they're not. It's something that's like, if I had an answer for that, I probably wouldn't have a job, because like my work would be done, and I think all of our work would be done. I think that it may seem a little pessimistic, but I think I think the important thing is just to keep trying and to keep moving forward.